the harder I hold on to my part of my little kingdom, the less likely I am to have another opportunity. Okay, God wants to give us so much into our hands, but we're so busy grasping what we've already got and not trusting to release that to Him so He can give us more.
Yeah.
And so the person who very rarely gets promoted is the person who's indispensable.
Welcome to the Kings and Priests podcast.
Hey, and welcome to the Kings and Priests podcast, where we are super passionate about amplifying the influence of young professionals for the church and for the world. I really hope that this conversation helps you feel like you can take your next step towards becoming and being the change that's needed wherever you are. So without taking up any more of your time, let's get stuck into this episode's conversation. Welcome, Phil. So good to have you on the Kings and Priests podcast, mate. We are in an amazing location in the middle of the Hunter Valley. We're here for INC's state conference. Now, INC is a denomination that's been around for many years. You've been a big part of it. It's the place where we met, really. So you were my wife's pastor. You were her spiritual dad. You grew her up. She's a woman. She's now because of you, and I think that's why we connected so well. I think that's why I was able to learn so much under you and from you. So it's a real honor to have you here with me in this room to record this in this beautiful house that you've given up for today. I'm sure you could be enjoying the Hunter Valley, but you're here with us today. So we're really going to take as much out of you as we can. So just tell me a little bit about your involvement in INC. Well, let's start there.
Sure. So it started back when we were Christian Outreach Centre in 1982. Wow. I was 14 years old. We moved from New Zealand, where I grew up on a dairy farm, and suddenly my dad decided he was changing careers and he was going to become a pastor. We spent a year and a half on the Gold Coast, and then from there we moved to Mansfield, which was the largest of the Christian Outreach Centres. The pastor at the name of Clark Taylor, who founded the movement in 1974. And so from us, we've had an involvement for just 8 years after it started, and now in 2021. Long journey. I've done most roles within our movement. I've done youth pastoring under Pastor Jeff Woodward. I've done traveling ministry, partnering with a man by the name of Marcus Arden, who trained me. And then 17 years ago, especially being a pastor's kid, I went against what I'd always said. I never want to be a pastor. God spoke very clearly to me after having spent a fair bit of time in business. I did an MBA. I was also part of an organisation that was working with Christian media, working with television. Wow. I'd done distribution for books, and we'd started a mail order business around Spirit-filled Christian books, working with TV for that as well. A whole very diverse career. I even spent some time mining, Prashant. Wow. You wouldn't know it. I've got a blasting ticket. I can blow things up. So, you know, if those challenges come to life, bang!
Yeah, we'll call you. Yeah.
But yeah, so we took it on, and we took on a local church. I didn't know until I took on the church that it had a daycare attached to it.
Sure.
And so when we first moved to Coffs Harbour from Brisbane, it was a challenge to us. We thought the first thing we'd be doing would be growing the church, but what needed the most attention was the daycare. Wow. It was a challenge to me, having an MBA and having worked in another business, to find in the first year we lost $30,000 in the daycare, and then $60,000 in the second. And so it was a thing that we had to turn around real quick. And so taking business principles alongside principles that we've taken from my Christian faith, applying them together, has got us to the place today where we're running 4 churches and a couple of daycares, specifically about 200 children in early childhood that we're responsible for. But obviously I also sit on our national executive, which oversees all of our 130 locations, our 5 schools, and also the 900 children that are in early childhood. So I've just found right throughout my life that the reward for success in an area is more work. So more responsibility.
And I don't know how you have time to play golf, because you play golf and you play it well. But if we take a step backwards, let's draw down on your time in business. So, because that's obviously helped you become the leader who you are, who develops many other leaders, who sends them out, very, very releasing. You know, many of the pastors I know started in your church, and my wife being one example, but one of my best friends as well. Now, thinking about business principles, so you inherited a church, like you said, you inherited the daycare as well. So you inherited volunteers in the church world, not for profit. where we raise money, I guess, if you want to call it like that, through people's generosity. But you also inherited employees. Now, talk to me about the difference between leading employees who are paid to be there, who are paid to do their role, and leading volunteers who are coming and giving their time out of the goodness and the overflow of their heart. What's that tension like? How do you bridge that gap? Do you bridge that gap? And what are some struggles you found when you were leading both at the same time?
Wow, those are a lot of great questions, Prashant. And at the heart of it, I think, is both leadership and good, successful business people, is you've got to have the gift of empathy. Most people are quite happy just to look at the world through their single focus lens. How does this affect me?
Sure.
But if you're going to be a good leader, if you're going to be someone, even a good husband, you've got to be able to put yourself in your wife's shoes.
Yeah.
And so in business, it really helps us to be able to step outside of, I need to sell this product or this service, to understand why a customer has this need, to be able to put yourself in the customer's shoes and then successfully provide the need. Okay. And then within church environments or any not-for-profits where you're working with volunteers, one of the key questions that you have to ask yourself as a leader is, what's in it for them?
Yeah.
What's the exchange that I'm making with this person for their gift? And their gift comes in time, it comes in their finances, and it comes in their abilities. Okay, so I've got to understand the mindset, I've got to understand the exchange that's taking place. Very simple with an employee, because at its base level,
Sure.
the exchange that's taking place is, give me your time, talent, and your gift, and I will give you some money in exchange for it.
Sure.
Okay, but when it comes to working within a volunteer organization, by its very nature and definition, it's not for profit. It's not a monetary exchange, but don't get it wrong. There is an exchange that takes place. What is that exchange? Why do people volunteer? And so when you can understand that and answer that question, then you can make that available. People do it for all sorts of reasons. And I know that you've worked in voluntary capacities with church over many, many years, and into other organizations as well. A successful business, like a great business, also works with volunteers. If you think about interns who are prepared to be able to come on board so that they can pick up, what's the exchange? They're picking up experience. They're picking up the networks that are there. They're really getting hold of the culture. They're resetting their normal from whatever it might have been as their background into what is going to help them be successful in their field.
Right.
Okay. And so for us with not-for-profits, largely, we do the same thing. We go, what can we offer these people for what we need in exchange?
Great.
And it's just empathy, understanding what it's like to be in someone else's shoes.
Great. And from a Christian business owner or a Christian leader's, manager's point of view, where they're leading employees who are paid to be there. Now, we often hear about this lifestyle of duality, right? So we're a Christian on a Sunday, we go into our workplace, we lead our company from Monday to Friday, and it's kind of led in a very, I don't want to say capitalistic type of way, but that's just our society at the moment. You know, what's the best return on this investment? We invest money into our staff, we do expect a return. How do we move from a dualistic lifestyle as a Christian business owner or leader to an integrated one where we are a Christian 24/7? So the business principles we learn aren't so much about the return on investment as opposed to the unlocking of potential or purpose within someone. Because when you think about, and I love that you touched on it in the church, someone comes and volunteers almost because they buy into vision, right? The Bible says without vision, the people either cast off restraint or they perish. So people want to be led and need strong vision because it helps them direct where they feel like they're meant to be going, where they feel like they're actually created for. And through that unlocks their purpose and their potential and unlocks their gifts and their talents, right? How does that principle that we use in the church, vision's a big part of the church, how do we take that and use it in our business? Now, let's go specific to childcare. So something that you've really, you're pioneering currently. How have you taken what you've learned in the church with vision? Here's where we're going, here's who we are, taken that to an employee and said exactly the same thing. Here's who we are, here's where we're going. Now, yes, you get paid to be here, but can you buy in just that extra bit for us?
Sure. I think at the heart of that, you're talking about culture, you're talking about shared values that we have, but you've got to come back to motivation. You talked about this. And so, Prashan, when people know that you genuinely love them, when people know that you want the best for their lives, it's easy then to help them stay accountable to the commitments that they have made.
Right.
More often than not, what the key thing is that people want from leaders, and this is whether it's in business or in not-for-profits or in church, is that someone will come alongside me and help me to accomplish that God's purpose for my life.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't know what that is, and so we need someone who's going to help us to discover and unpack that. But then from there, more often than not, people will resist you telling them exactly what to do. But when you can come alongside in a coaching role, and this happens in business as well as it does in church,
Sure.
and draw out the potential that's there in agreement with what they've found as a revelation from God, and from even asking themselves of those questions. Within an environment that is successful, there's a dynamic that takes place that we can do more together than what we can do individually.
Great.
There was a great movie that Russell Crowe did called A Beautiful Mind, and he explained that in a mathematical principle. If you've got one horse, you get 1 horsepower. If you've got 2, you've got 4, and so on. There's a multiplication process that takes place.
Sure.
As a leader, as soon as you give yourself to serve someone else's life, and that person's life has been impacted and is better because they chose to come in under or give themselves to your leadership, they'll come and go out of your life. It's okay as a successful and self-confident leader to be able to release them to do that. But if they know that the environment that you create, they flourish or they prosper more than what they'll do on their own, the second time that people come back and give themselves to that place, that's the compliment. We find within the daycares, if you're in business and you're providing a service or a product, you're looking at the unique selling proposition, the USP. And so what is it that differentiates me from all the others that are out there? And for us, we want to make sure that that differentiation is felt at the very heart of whether you're volunteering for us or you're an employee.
That's great.
One of the great challenges, and you've done this many times, is to go from being a volunteer in an organization, but then you become indispensable.
Yep.
And so now you go from being a volunteer to being a paid employee, keeping the same motivation as a volunteer, even though I'm being paid. The worst thing that can happen, and such a blight upon us as leaders, is where we've taken someone who gave themselves to us for the cause, and then we change that cause because I employ them to be a monetary cause.
Right.
It's partnering or marrying those two things together. You really know you're doing well within your business or in your church when you see your paid staff also volunteering.
Volunteering, yeah. That's great. And I think it's a dynamic that only money can really instill in a life. I speak from personal experience. When I moved from volunteer to paid staff, I actually started doing most of the tasks I was delegating. When I was a volunteer, I was delegating most of my tasks, empowering leaders. When I was paid, I felt guilty not doing the tasks that I was actually taking off people to do, because the money, so I saw the money as a remuneration of my time spent doing tasks as opposed to time spent developing leaders. And it's interesting that money can have that dynamic. When it comes to money, when it comes to being transparent across the board, I love that in our church, in our denomination, even today in today's session, Pastor Ross really opened up the finances and said, this is where we're at, this is where we're projected to be. How do you bring employees in on that conversation? So as a business owner or as a Christian manager leader in the world, how do we bring our staff, our staff or employees into the conversation about finance when it affects them so personally?
Presh, the Bible talks about Bible or biblical principles for finance almost more than anything else. 1 out of 3 passages in the Bible is talking about what we're doing with that we've been entrusted to, or what we're doing with our money. Okay, and so the Bible also tells me that money is a revealer of hearts.
Yeah.
Okay, so wherever your treasure is, wherever your money is, your heart's going to be positioned in that place. And so whether it's in business or you're working within church ministry, it helps us to be equipped with the language of money. And the language of money is numbers, it's finance. Okay, and so there's been a traditional, oh, well, money's evil, is this thought in Christian faith, but the Bible doesn't say that. It says the love of money is a root of all types of evil, and we can get the two a little bit mixed up. And so there's almost been a pushback sometimes with people of faith to actually have an understanding of finances.
Yep.
And to be honest, sometimes we actually discriminate against people who are really good with money within churches.
Yep.
And so for me, my advice to any young person starting out in business or any young person looking to take up roles of leadership within the church is get to understand the language of money. Learn what a profit and loss statement is.
Right.
Understand a balance sheet. If you've got the time and the opportunity and the ability, do an MBA. Okay, and you will use that again and again, both not just your business opportunities, but certainly those things that have longer term effects, the language of kingdom of heaven itself,
right.
In faith. So yeah, MBA, understand finances, learn what it is to be an office holder. That's larger than just a single person organization or company. So what does it mean to be a shareholder? What does it mean to be able to sit as a director of a company? What responsibilities do they have to the shareholders?
Sure.
And that type of language does translate also into the things of faith, into the things that we hold together in what we would call church.
And I think if we don't move from me type leadership, where I'm trying to build my own empire, to we type leadership, where I'm trying to build this culture and build this people around me, then we are our ceiling. We can only do as much as we're capable of doing. You know, we're finite resource. We can only give so much energy. We only have so much knowledge. So we actually create our own ceiling if we don't move to thinking about how we can empower, how we can develop the people around us, right? And if we're not growing, then how can we expect our businesses, our teams, our organizations to grow? And it brings me to a question, because I've seen you acquire a church and a daycare to now having four churches up the mid-north coast with 4 daycares attached to them, or in the process of attaching daycares to them. And watching that, it prompts a question in me. What's the difference between scalability? Because it looks like you've structured your processes well enough to scale. What's the difference between scalability and growth? And is that a structural change that you've made intentionally in your business, in your organization structure, so that you can scale? Or is it just about acquiring more locations and then building process and structure around that as you grow, kind of being a bit more fluid?
Prashant, I wish we had it perfect, that we just got it right straight off the bat. That would have been fantastic. But the reality was that most things in life you learn from experience. And so I became the cork in the bottle. You tend to grow to the limits of your personal capacity.
Yep.
And I find this a lot of times whether people are volunteering or people are in business, people are in church leadership, is that when I'm doing something that I love, I want to hold on to that and retain the right to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so whether you love to preach or whether you love to be the one to serve the customer, or you want to create the product, or you're the best person to be able to give a haircut, and so it's really difficult then to be able to trust someone else to come into your place and give them the right to serve your customer who's always been with you.
Sure.
The harder I hold on to my part of my little kingdom, the less likely I am to have another opportunity. Okay, God wants to give us so much into our hands, but we're so busy grasping what we've already got and not trusting to release that to Him so He can give us more.
Yeah.
And so the person who very rarely gets promoted is the person who's indispensable.
Sure.
I've found right throughout my life again and again that the key to have the next opportunity is make sure there's room for someone else to take on this current thing that I'm doing. Even though I might love it, even though I might be good at it or even the best at it, I can tell you what, there's other people that are coming through that want that opportunity. For us with the daycares and certainly with the churches, we found what it was to find my capacity, but the reality is I've got to let go of what I may love doing here in order to be able to be entrusted with more, and that's where our key is at the moment. I think also the same as anything else, it rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah.
So, and you can't just go out and grab someone new.
Sure.
There is a fruit that comes from working from the ground up, developing people that have got your heart.
Right.
Every meaningful relationship for us, it comes from trust.
And were you intentional? Because I think in previous conversations we've had, you centralized a lot of your systems and you centralized a lot of your team. So you now lead 4 churches with multiple daycares. Now that can be seen as 4 separate systems and 4 separate structures. But what you've done to foresee the growth is you centralized those structures that can be used across the board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how's that changed the game, and how is that changing the potential for scaling?
The change process itself uses up a lot of the resources that you'd much rather put into some other places sometimes. When we took on a lot of these other enterprises, especially the ones that were existing, they had established systems, they had established culture that was already there, which was different than what we had. And so the process to be able to bring that together and just find the one system that everyone would agree with, it costs a lot of energy, but the outcomes further on is so much better for us. We literally over the last year have reduced 130 bank accounts down to 15.
Wow.
We've gone from 5 different accounting systems to 1. We use 0 now. But the process of doing that while the operations are still going, you don't get 2 months with everything stopping so that you can just get it clean and get it right. It's almost like, it's like the mechanic fixing the engine while the engine's going.
Yeah.
And that heart surgeon that's open heart surgery, that thing's still beating while they're fixing it up. And so for us going through and bringing change and being able to do it in a way that doesn't destroy what we're really valuing, but while we're growing it as well.
And how fast do you bring that change? Because I've only been in ministry for, count the numbers on both my hands. You've been in ministry for much longer. You've probably seen the ups and downs of ministry. You've probably seen the tension in changing culture that you have inherited and that hasn't been created by you. Now, I've only heard, but I've heard that there's some cases which you need to do quite slowly, and there's some you have to you come in and chop the head off, and the rest of the snake will die, so to say. What's your experience in that? Because I've heard of stories where Christian business people or managers may be identifying toxic culture within their teams or within their workplace. How do you have those conversations that change the culture? And where's the line you draw between having really frank discussions with employees or really encouraging someone to, hey, you're better than this, this is where you're up to, but this is where I know you can get to, and really coming alongside them as a coach. So where's the line between coach and manager?
Man, they're great questions, and they just bring up so many examples and so many experiences that are there. You've got to know your values right from the start. What is it that you will tolerate? What is it that you've got a little bit of wiggle room in? And what is it that this is a non-negotiable boundary? We don't cross those areas. With your boundaries, you don't set your value right up against that. What you do is you leave yourself some margin room, etc. So that's a key part in life. So often we want to live at 102%, and that extra 2%, it just brings the stress, it brings the problem, that's there for us. I find within my teams, I find certainly within the volunteers that we're working with, I want to be able to create culture and values, but sometimes, this is difficult to do as a leader, certainly as a pastor, is to be able to say sometimes that volunteer is going to cost me other volunteers.
Yeah,
sure. Do you know what I mean? It's the person who comes onto the team, and that team is functioning well, it was going great, and this person wants to be a part of it, but there's a whole bunch of dysfunction there. Sure. The values are very different, and I lose that great synergy that was there. In business, we put it this way, some customers are going to cost you more than they'll ever be able to bring in, and you've got to understand that your business is better without that person.
Right.
Within church culture, sometimes we can bend over backwards for that dysfunctional person who's bringing dysfunction into our church we want to make sure that we're loving everyone. Some of the best ways that you can love some people is to be very clear about your boundaries and the behaviors that are there.
Yeah.
When we're small, when we're just starting out in business, we're desperate to have, maybe that next sale, or we're desperate within a church to have, if they leave, that's a really big proportion of my church. And so suddenly we find someone else setting the standard, someone else making the decision, and you don't realize what you're giving up when you say, it's okay, I'll tolerate this.
Yeah.
We've heard it and we've said it from the pulpits ourselves. What we tolerate, we endorse.
Yep. So talking about, dysfunctional teammates or colleagues or employees, really we're trying to almost, again, revisit expectations, which we should be having from day one, from the onboarding process or from the interview for, welcome to my team. Here's the expectations, quite clear. This is what's expected of you as an employee or a team member. And then so we can have discussions later if your performance is, wavering from what we initially established. Let's just revisit these expectations we'd already had set for you. In that, as leaders, we need to know our measures of success. Like, what is a successful team? What's a successful employee? What does that look like? In your experience, growing from one church and a daycare to now 4, has that changed? Has the measure of success changed for you? And let's throw COVID in the mix. Has that changed what success looks like to you? Because everything in church world is different now. And I'm not sure about the daycare space, but I would assume that there's a lot going on in that space as well. So how has that shaped success for you?
You got to understand your definition of that and make sure that your whole team or your organization understands it.
Right.
Sometimes it's a lot simpler in business. In business, one of the things I counsel people who are looking to start a business, they're looking to maybe purchase a business, is to ask them not how they're going to get into it, but when would they get out of it.
Yeah.
Again, so one of the definitions of success is, okay, if I reach this number or I produce this result, it's at that stage. And so you start coming to the heart motivations. Why are you getting into this? For some people, they say they're in business, but the reality is they go out and they buy themselves a job. And that's business. But really, the reality is that it's contingent upon them working within it. They can't take a day off. They can't step out of it. And really, the business owns them rather than them owning the business. For other people, when I ask them, well, okay, what outcome would you want? Like, if we could achieve that outcome now, would you be happy to let that business go? And oftentimes the inventor, the person who's come up with a product or the unique service that's there, is so in love with the product that no, that's all about this. It's all about tweaking. It's very difficult then to bring it to market. Okay, because that's it. For us in church, it's a different story. For church, we're not owners, we're stewards.
Yeah.
And stewardship is a higher calling, Prashan, than ownership. When you're an owner, you can do whatever you want with it. Someone else is going to come back to me and go, well, you're treating that car a bit rough. Hey, it's my car. But I hire someone's car. Oh, that's a different story. I take it back and they're looking around it and looking for the scratches, etc. So I understand as a Christian that everything in my life is only given to me by my generous Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
And one day I'll give an account for it. And when I understand that, okay, it's the higher calling than someone, well, it's mine. It's my day, it's my time, it's my toys, it's my money. I can do what I want with it. Who are you to say anything? Versus, you know something, this is the most precious resource anyone can be entrusted with, is firstly my time, but then others as well.
Yeah.
And so I give an account for that. Higher calling, higher mentality, different understanding.
Yeah. And I think there's an overlap there, really. I think that Christians who are in the marketplace, I believe that the talents and the gifts and the businesses and the money
So true.
are to be stewarded. It's not theirs at the end of the day anyway. Yes, you can build your business and yes, you can have a vision, but when we really think about the gifts that God gives us from above, that they're all good, we can only see that as how are we stewarding this? Because at the end of the day, when we stand in front of Him, He's not going to say, how many times did you pray to me today? He's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. Like, you've done well with what I gave you. And that's in the world. That's not everyone's called to ministry in the church. Yeah, as pastors.
That's how you turn a business into a ministry. It's when you understand that this here is for His purposes.
Yeah, and that's awesome. That's awesome. So, because you've taken on one in 4 now, so 4 churches, 4 daycares, or soon to be 4. How have you sustained that? Because that in itself is quite self-sustaining, where you've got a daycare that is almost funding the church, and then you've got church, which is a not-for-profit, so once again funded by the congregants. How have you set yourself up, or did you kind of just stumble into that? You said that you inherited the church and the daycare came with that, but now it looks like you're looking for passive income.
The income is an outcome of a healthy daycare. That's part of it. But one of the ways that you get a healthy daycare is when the daycare recognizes itself as being more than income producing, but as a mission. The money's only one outcome. You know, when it's working well, is that the church is reaching into open doors into families' lives. When someone entrusts your children with you, if you give me Avery for an afternoon, okay, perhaps you couldn't entrust anything else more precious to your life to me. And we have this happen countless times in countless places, again and again and again. And so when people trust us with their kids, they then start to trust us with the other stuff. Hey, my marriage is not doing great. Hey, we're really tight financially. Hey, my health's not good. I've had a bad report. And so what starts out by serving someone in this capacity opens doors into others. Okay, and so even it might be after the period of care has passed. The child's gone into primary school, is no longer in the early childhood space. But if we've loved them and served them well, and we've built trust that's there, we still get to be a reference. Yeah. And so when my educators recognize that, it's wonderful. It's not a problem for me when you refer someone with an issue to our church team. That's actually why we exist. That's great. The greatest thing that happens for us is not, oh, wow, we made an extra percentage profit off our daycare income. But when our parents enter the doors of a church that they've now called their church because we served them well in that space, you know, something that's a bigger tick. Because I'd take the profit in exchange for that. That's what the money's there for, is to continue to see the kingdom expand. And when the whole team recognizes that's what our success looks like, it's not a dollar number, it's about seeing the kingdom come, and that we're all contributing with our gifts in some way for that. And then the same thing happens with the church and their workplaces, etc. You know, the goal's not to see more people in one place, it's to see Jesus in people. Yeah, that's great. And I love the idea that you're speaking about the kingdom of heaven, right? Sometimes we think of that as a flashy statement. You know, Jesus talks about it so much in the book of Matthew, and he relates it to very everyday items, everyday life. And often we think, you know, the kingdom of heaven it's a revolutionary, life-changing thing, and it is. But sometimes bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth is just taking care of a child who doesn't have the best family situation, or taking care of a parent who may be really struggling with, say, domestic violence, taking care of an employee. I know, you know, the pastoral care needs of employees, especially in construction businesses, in businesses that really take an effect on someone's life. Sometimes bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth is just having a meaningful conversation and checking up, and really coming back to the start of this conversation, having empathy, where we can step into their situation, just like Jesus did. He stepped into the mess. He didn't bypass, you know, the woman at the well. He actually rerouted his journey to come in and see her. And I think that's a lesson for all of us leaders in business or the church. It's instead of trying to navigate away from the mess, how can we take a step towards it? Because I think discipleship and leadership development, really at its highest form, is always going to be messy, and it will never be program based, where we just, you know, put someone into a leadership development program and expect them to come out as a better leader. We're really going to have to get in and do the dirty work. Yeah. Mess is the place of change, Prashant. You know, when people are doing things well and they're comfortable, it's very difficult to get them to change that, because it's going to risk the comfort. Right. But we know that in the place of disruption is when people are prepared to look at something new. If we think of all the things that we've embraced that's been new over the COVID period, remember the first time you saw that code that you had to take a photograph of with your phone and get logged in somewhere? It's like, what? But you know, now it's just second nature. Sure. It's that place of change that happens in discomfort and mess and sometimes crisis. Yeah. And so for us, that's the place that we can many times bring the great news of Jesus Christ and the offer that he makes to each and every one of us. That's great, mate. Now to wrap up, we are going to do 3 quick round questions, where I'm just going to ask you 3 questions. You can answer them as quickly as possible, just the first thing that pops in. Very difficult as a pastor, but I'll have a go. Okay, so the first question is, what does your Sabbath look like? For me, game of golf with some good friends. Great. What's one resource that has helped you in business? Understanding finances, my MBA. Yeah, MBA. And question 3, what's the best piece of advice that was given to you when you started out in business? understand your motivation, and understand when you'd get out of it and why.
So good. Well, thanks so much for being with us, Phil. Honestly, can't thank you enough. You've been such an integral part of who I am, who my wife is, who our family is, and we just love you guys. We just can't wait to continue to do this journey together.
Love and proud of you, Prashant. Thank you for inviting me, and this is a great resource that you're creating for the generation coming through.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you did enjoy it, why don't you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. You can also join our online community via Facebook or Instagram. And better yet, why don't you send this to someone who you think it may help in helping them take their next step towards becoming and being the change in their church and in their world. Because don't forget, we are the kings and priests of our world.